I think we should deal with him now, Martha said. A slow smile crept onto her face. The glow in her hand grew in intensity. I could only suppose how she meant to deal with me. I feared for my life. Brynolin has some interest in him, countered Guinevere. We should hold on to him for a while. Martha didn't argue, and her hand returned to normal. No, I didn't meet my end that day. Instead, these two mystics kept me prisoner, locked in a separate room. I saw them only at meal times. Brought out to my little stool, where I again became rooted, I was fed my dinner. Surprisingly, the meals were tasty. I wondered if I were not being fattened for dinner. Witches ate children, didn't they? At least they did in fairy tales. I was no child, I reminded myself, and they ate along with me. Both as slim as reeds, where would they have found the room? When I'd had my full, I was led back to my small cell. The door would open on its own and close behind me the same way. I tried to open it, but it would only open for the witches. One small window let in some light, but it was made of a material much stronger than any glass. I tried to smash it, but with no success. There was no escape and little to do, and so I spent my days listening at the door. Martha often spoke of her fear of being burned or buried alive. Such was her distress. I, her prisoner, actually felt sorry for her. I cannot go through that again. No one is going to hurt you, Guinevere reassured. You may have saved my life, but you didn't save me from the pain, the fear. They buried me alive. They had to think you were dead so we could make our escape. But the others, their deaths were real, Martha sobbed. Or at least I thought she sobbed. It was hard to tell through the closed door, and other than carefully controlled anger, I hadn't seen her express any real emotion. Chained like animals, crushed beneath the weight of all those stones, burnt alive. You may be able to forget the screams. I cannot. I knew something of Windfall's history. They could only be talking about the witch trials of the 1600s. If what I was hearing was true, this made Martha over 300 years old. Bara and Colin could clearly see Cedric, crouched next to the door. Light would have flickered around the frame, taunting him with the promise of freedom, but the door wouldn't open. His only hope, something he might learn from behind it. Caught up in the tale, Bara and Colin failed to worry that someone might actually be listening in on them as well. They should have paid more attention. The doorknob clicked as it turned. Colin, expecting some kind of danger, threw himself on the bed, pushing Bara behind him. This was a truly unfortunate choice. It made them look guilty of something they were not. The door swung open and Denmother stood in the open frame. She had obviously come straight from bed, not bothering to dress. In her green housecoat, she resembled an avocado-colored refrigerator from the 50s, rounded at the edges but basically rectangular, her head a canister on top. She stood motionless, a supremely satisfied look on her portly face. Her eyes narrowed, slanting upwards into a smile, but it wasn't a happy smile. Behind her was the broom handle of a man that was Dormmaster Weasley. He looked very ill at ease, nerves causing him to jump around as he tried to get a look into the room from behind her bulk. "Oh my, Mr. Van Fitt," he croaked. "When your parents hear of this, they will be most displeased, and I shudder when I think what the headmaster will say. I absolutely shudder." "It's not what you think, Dormmaster Weasley," Colin protested. "Really?" Weasley mocked. Denmother stepped into the room, allowing him to do the same. Unlike Denmother, Weasley had dressed well, in fact. His black suit hadn't a wrinkle. He'd obviously come from a night on the town. "Just what is it, then? Because what I see is a young lady in your room in the middle of the night and upon your bed, I might add." "Never mind with your worthless excuses," Denmother shot. Then she spoke over her shoulder to an unseen individual. "Here they are, just like I said they'd be." Bara's heart dropped. Her father came into the room. From the look on his face, it was obvious he'd also jumped to the wrong conclusion. Bara, even though she'd not done or even been about to do what they all thought was so obvious, blushed. Denmother took in her red cheeks and the state of her stockings. There was no doubt in her mind. Shameful girl! Bara made to protest. She may have been guilty of many things, but not that. Silenced with a look from her father, she never uttered a word. "Thank you for your concern in this matter," Mr. Kavanagh said in a tone that ended any discussion. Denmother stopped midstream, rethinking the wisdom of continuing. Mr. Kavanagh turned to Bara. "Get your coat." Dad, he wasn't having any excuses either. "Now, Bara." Colin rose to her defense. Mr. Kavanagh, he started. He didn't finish. I'll be discussing this matter with your parents. Mr. Kavanagh made a fist. It was obvious he was working hard at controlling his temper. Bara could only hope Colin had the sense to remain silent. Weasley was almost gleeful. Oh, you can rest assured his parents will hear of this. Oh, yes, indeed, they will hear. Bara hadn't made a move. Where's your coat? Mr. Kavanagh shouted. We're going! Colin jumped into action. He rummaged around on his bed and grabbed her coat and bag, which Bara noted was heavy with the weight of the diary. He handed it over. I'm sorry, she whispered. Be careful, he countered. Denmother had stood, ham-hock arms folded over an enormous bread-basket chest, silently protesting, but she couldn't contain herself. I should think it's a bit late for that. Mr. Kavanagh looked sternly. Weasley nervously smoothed his already smooth hair. I think, Penelope, we should let Mr. Kavanagh deal with his daughter. Denmother's breast and arms lifted with the strength of her breath. She let out a little snort, but said nothing else. With her coat in hand, Bara was ushered out into the hallway. She tried to stop and put it on, but Mr. Kavanagh continued to push her along. The clucking and harping of Denmother and Weasley followed them down the stairs. Poor Colin was getting an earful. Bara didn't envy him. But then, as she looked at the stern set in her father's eyes, she began to worry for herself. He paused at the foot of the stairs just long enough for her to finally put on her coat. Then an enraged father and an anxious daughter went out into the tempestuous night.
The Wisp is published on Amazon.com. Also available on Amazon is Monsters, Real and Imagined, Tragic, Frightening, and Funny, All Too Brief, a collection of short stories and poetry. Strays, a collection of short stories and philosophical love poems, and Tattoo, Calling All Soldiers Home, a collection of poems in brevity.